The ground glows at night. A lake of liquid rock has been burning for over 100 years without stopping. A man feeds raw meat to wild predators in the dark, and they come to him by name. Monkeys communicate in something researchers had to call language because nothing else fit. And the earth itself, right beneath your feet, is cracking open in real time. One country, all of it real. Almost nobody goes there. That last fact is the strangest thing I've ever learned about this planet. We built entire industries around visiting Rome. We fill planes to see the pyramids. We queue for hours to stand near Machu Picchu. And somehow, we collectively decided to ignore the one place that predates all of it. The place where the oldest human bones on Earth were found, where an empire adopted Christianity before England even existed as a country, where a volcanic lake has burned without interruption for over a century, where churches were carved downward into solid rock and are still being used 800 years later. We walked straight past it. That is not a travel statistic. That is a civilizational blind spot. I'm going to show you something in the next 20 minutes that most people spend their entire lives never seeing. Not because it's hidden, not because it's hard to reach, not because the information doesn't exist, because nobody told them to look. By the end of this, you won't just understand why Ethiopia matters. You'll understand why it has always mattered. You'll understand why the world looking away from it is one of the greatest mistakes in the history of human curiosity. And you'll understand something about yourself, about where you actually come from, that no classroom, no textbook, no travel show ever bothered to teach you. This isn't a destination. This is the original human story. Still burning, still breathing, still very much alive. And nobody told you to look until right now. Imagine driving a car down a long mountain road. Green hills turn to scrubland. Scrubland turns to dust. Then the color just drains out of the world. By the time the plateau disappears behind you, the outside temperature has crossed 45 degrees Celsius. You're now 116 meters below sea level. Welcome to the Danakil Depression, the hottest inhabited place on the surface of the planet. Here's what makes that fact extraordinary. People have chosen to live here for thousands of years. Not because they were trapped, because this is home. The Afar people didn't survive the Danakil, they belong to it. There's a difference. Think about the most uncomfortable place you've ever been. A heat wave, a broken AC in July, that one terrible camping trip. Now multiply that by 10 and make it permanent. The Afar built a civilization there. But wait, before we go any further, there's something I need you to actually hear. Beneath the Danakil, 3 of Earth's tectonic plates are pulling away from each other. The Arabian plate, the Nubian plate, and the Somali plate, all separating right now at about 2 centimeters per year. You're not standing on stable ground. You're standing on a rift that's still forming. In about 5 million years, the sea will flood this place. A new ocean will be born here. For now, the rock holds, barely. At the heart of the depression sits a volcano called Erta Ale. In the Afar language, that name means smoking mountain, which turns out to be the understatement of the geological era. Because at the summit of Erta Ale is a lava lake, not a crater, a lake of liquid rock that has been active continuously for over a century. The surface cracks, it reseals, it cracks again. Temperatures at the surface exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Afar called it the gateway to the underworld. Geologists call it a window into the Earth's mantle. Both descriptions are accurate. Standing at the edge of Erta Ale is the closest any living person gets to witnessing what Earth looked like before life existed. Not in a textbook, not in a theory, but right in front of you, present and furious. And then, a few kilometers away, the color begins. Pools of superheated water push up through the salt crust of the depression floor. When that water hits oxygen, something extraordinary happens. It crystallizes into towers and terraces of neon yellow, acid green, and a specific shade of orange you'd only expect to see in a chemistry lab. This is Dallol, the most visually intense landscape on the surface of this planet. The pH of these pools measures 0.1, more acidic than battery acid. In 2019, researchers confirmed something the landscape had been telling us all along. Certain pools at Dallol contain no microbial life, not reduced life, not microscopic extremophils barely surviving at the edges, nothing, completely sterile. It may be the only truly lifeless environment on the surface of the Earth. The world doesn't owe us its hospitality. A column of dust appears at the edge of the frame. At first, it's just a shape. Then, the shape becomes camels. Hundreds of them in a single line so long it curves over the horizon. The men walking alongside them don't speak. Nobody gives directions. Nobody checks a map. They don't need to. This route has been running for at least 1,000 years. The Afar mine salt from the floor of the depression by hand. Each slab weighs about 30 kilograms. Each camel carries 4 of them. The caravans travel 3 days north to a trading town called Mekelle, the same destination they've been heading towards since the era of the Aksumite Empire. The method hasn't changed. The route hasn't changed. Only the price of salt has changed. Think about that the next time you shake a salt shaker over your food. Somewhere in the supply chain of human history, this is where salt came from. Carried by hand by camel across the floor of a rift that's tearing a continent in two. These men cross one of the most hostile places on Earth as though it's just another Tuesday, because for them, it is. The road north from the depression climbs back through color, brown to ochre, ochre to the deep green of the Ethiopian highlands, and then the road ends at the edge of a pit in the rock. You look down. 12 meters below the plateau's surface, a church rises to meet you. Not built upward from a foundation, carved downward from above. The Church of St. George in Lalibela is 32 meters on each side, cut from a single block of red volcanic rock by monks with iron chisels beginning in the 12th century. The roof is a grid of equal-armed crosses, flush with the ground, so that standing at the rim, you're looking directly down onto the ceiling. The building isn't above you. You're above the building. King Lalibela ordered 11 churches cut this way, into the living rock, after making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He decided to bring Jerusalem home, in stone, downward into the earth. These churches are still active. 800 years after the last chisel strike, people still worship here. Every Ethiopian Christmas, January 7th, 60,000 pilgrims descend on Lalibela and press their hands to the same stone the monks cut. The doorways are worn smooth, not by weather, by hands. 8 centuries of hand. That's what belief looks like when it's made physical and refuses to stop. 300 kilometers north, a needle of granite rises 24 meters against a blue sky. The Aksumite stele, carved from a single piece of stone, weighing 160 tons, raised by a civilization whose trading partners included Rome, Persia, and India. The Aksumite Empire adopted Christianity in 316 AD. That makes Ethiopia one of the first Christian nations on earth, earlier than England, earlier than France, earlier than most of the countries that would later send missionaries to Africa. And according to Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the Ark of the Covenant rests in a chapel in Axum, guarded by a single monk who is never permitted to leave the grounds. That is stated without elaboration. None is needed. The escarpment arrives without warning. The highland road curves, the tree line ends, and there it is. A wall of basalt columns dropping 1,500 meters in a single vertical fall. Fog burning off the valley far below. Africa laid out in every direction like something that hasn't yet decided what shape it wants to be. The Simien Plateau erupted 40 million years ago. Lava poured across the highlands, cooled, and was carved by millions of years of erosion into the most dramatic cliff landscape on the continent. Ras Dashen, its highest peak, reaches 4,550 meters, the fourth highest point in Africa. At the edge of the cliff, a face, a male Galata sits on a ledge with 1,500 meters of empty air at his back and watches the camera with the stillness of an animal that has nothing to prove. His chest carries a patch of bare skin so deeply red it looks painted. He opens his mouth in a slow yawn, 4 canine teeth the length of a human thumb. Then he closes his mouth and goes back to eating grass. Galatas are the only grass-grazing primates on Earth, the last surviving species of a genus that once ranged across Africa and Asia. They live exclusively above 2,000 meters on these highlands, spending their days on the plateau and their nights on the cliff face itself, where leopards cannot follow. A large troop numbers 800 animals. They communicate in a rolling, musical chittering that researchers have compared, in peer-reviewed papers, not as a poetic metaphor, to human conversation in complexity and social function. Watch a gelada troop move to the cliff edge at dusk. Infants clinging to their mothers' backs, old males at the rear. The whole column moving with the unhurried certainty of a community going home. The distance between their story and ours becomes genuinely difficult to locate. A kilometer from the Galata roost, something else is finishing its day. The Ethiopian wolf. Russet coat, white markings, a narrow muzzle built for patience rather than speed. Fewer than 500 remain on Earth, the rarest wild dog species in the world, found only on the high plateaus of Ethiopia. It hunts giant mole rats by waiting motionless outside their burrow entrances for as long as it takes. It has survived ice ages, volcanic upheaval, and the entire duration of human evolution on this continent. Now it's endangered because the highlands are shrinking. One shot, the wolf on the plateau, mountain light catching the russet coat, then it moves into the grass and it's gone. In the eastern highlands, a city has been keeping the world out for 14 centuries. Harar. 3.5 kilometers of whitewashed wall, 5 ancient gates, 82 mosques, 362 alleyways. A language spoken nowhere else. A cuisine prepared nowhere else. A tradition of painted interior courtyards that the outside world spent centuries not visiting. Founded in the 7th century, Harar became one of the great centers of Islamic scholarship in Africa, a 4th holy city of Islam by some accounts, drawing scholars from across the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. No foreign power ever took it. A British expedition reached the gates in 1855 and did not enter. Harar simply waited. The French poet Arthur Rimbaud, one of the most influential writers of the 19th century, abandoned writing entirely at age 20, came to Harar, and spent the last decade of his life here as a coffee and arms trader. He never wrote another line. The city has that effect. Then dusk falls, the last gate closes, and what comes next doesn't come through the gate. A man sits at the edge of the old city with a basket of raw meat. In the darkness beyond the torchlight, 2 green eyes, then more. Wild spotted hyenas move into the light, large, sloped, unhurried, covering the ground between dark and illuminated in a few easy strides. The Hararis have been feeding wild hyenas by hand since at least the 19th century. Originally to protect livestock, now continued as tradition and as something that resists easier description. The hyena man calls the animals by name. Up to 20 hyenas come within arm's reach of a seated human being. The line between wild and tame is a negotiation here, not a fact. Both sides have agreed to the terms. The hyenas withdraw before dawn. The gate opens. The city stirs. Harar has always known how to live alongside what others fear. The southwestern corner of Ethiopia doesn't announce itself. No dramatic cliff, no ancient monument at the road's end. The Omo Valley arrives as a quality of light, flat, wide, the kind of sky that makes the land beneath feel very old and very calm. The Omo River threads through yellow grass in long silver curves. As far as the drone holds, nothing that looks like the 21st century. At least 16 distinct peoples live here. The Mursi, Hamar, Karo, Dasanach, Nyangatom. They practice agro-pastoralism and cattle culture and seasonal ceremony on the same floodplain where their ancestors are buried. The Omo Valley is not a living museum. It's a place where the interruption never came. 20 bulls, shoulder to shoulder. A young man at one end. His expression, the concentrated stillness of someone about to do something that cannot be undone. He runs. He launches himself onto the first bull and crosses the entire line, running barefoot across 20 moving animals without falling. The crowd roars. Women with leg bells stamp in rhythm. The sound fills the valley. This is Ukuli Bula, the bull jumping by which a Hamar boy becomes a man, earns the right to marry and takes his place. It has been performed here, in this form, for longer than anyone can name. Failing means shame. Succeeding means adulthood. The terms are clear, and the clarity is its own kind of mercy. The drone climbs until the valley becomes a texture, river, grass, the faint geometry of settlements, and keeps climbing until Ethiopia looks the way it looked at the very beginning of this video. Ochre highlands at first light, volcanic peaks holding the last of the dark, a continent that stopped explaining itself long before we arrived to ask. Ethiopia is not a country the world forgot to visit. It is the country that existed before the world began. The oldest story, still unfinished.